Isaac, and I will be your host. Welcome to the First Congregational Church of Leesburg online service, and this is the 11th week of Ordinary Time, and we're in the series of Bread and Water, which looks at John chapter 6. But before we do, we have prayers, poems, and readings for you along the way. Peace out, and may the Force be with you, always.
He raises and delivers us from death. And even now, he shows us how to live, that we might savor life with every breath, that we might taste and see, might truly thrive, might see the good days that he wants for us, and make the best of all he has to give. And so he comes to live as one of us and teaches us afresh the ways of peace. He lives the fullest life in front of us and shows us how to break the bonds, release the captive, seek the truth that sets us free, to choose the right and do it, to increase the reach of love, the possibility of fruitful life together, and to hear the poor cry out and help them speedily. Psalm 34, retold by Malcolm Guite.
We light this candle to remind us of the humanity of Christ, who lived a full human experience like us, so we can now embrace every facet of our humanity, body, mind, and heart, as a part of our call to become more like God. We light this candle to remind us of the divine nature of Christ, who overcame every evil we conceived, and whose resurrection proves to the world that love overcomes evil, sin, and even death.
All right, so where are we at? John chapter 6 is a really big chapter, like 70-some verses. We're gonna be here for like 5 weeks or so exploring this chapter alone, because it's some of the richest and most complex theology that the Gospels have to offer. It is right here in John chapter 6. So rich, so deep. We can't even barely touch what's gonna be happening here. But in order for us to understand what's going on, it'd be nice to just stop and have a look around before we have this passage read to us by Nikki, and just see what's going on. Now you remember that this whole chapter starts off with Jesus feeding the 5,000 miraculously, and then walking on water across the other side of the sea. And this crowd that was fed follow him to the other side of the sea, and they keep following him around. And Jesus is teaching these people, as he walks around in the wilderness, he's teaching these people what this bread event meant. That was a lot of rhyming. Bread event meant, right? So he's teaching them what this means, and they're missing it. They keep missing it. It keeps going over their head, but it's supposed to, because they can't see it. The cross is going to make things come to light for everyone. Eventually we get there, and Jesus draws all people to himself. And before we get to that revelation of this self-sacrificial love of God, we have this really rich, deep theological teaching about Jesus being the bread of heaven, comparing himself to the manna in the wilderness from the Exodus story of Moses walking in the wilderness with the people of God. And this bread from heaven coming down, these are the different elements that we have going on here. So it's the same crowd that was fed, is the same crowd that's following Jesus around, and it's the same crowd that Jesus is talking here today. And next week is going to be the same crowd that says, See you later. This teaching was crazy. So what do you say? That's what we're going to get into. This is what he says. We'll have Nikki read it.
John chapter 6, verse 35, and then verses 41 through 51. Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will not be hungry at all, and whoever exercises faith in me will never get thirsty at all. Then the Jews began to murmur about him because he had said, I am the bread that came down from heaven. And they began saying, Is this not Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How does he now say, I have come down from heaven? In response, Jesus said to them, Stop murmuring amongst yourselves. No man can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I will resurrect him on the last day. It is written in the prophets, they will all be taught by God. Everyone who has listened to the Father and has learned comes to me. Not that any man has seen the Father, except the one who is from God. This one has seen the Father. Most truly I say to you, whoever believes has everlasting life. I am the bread of life. Your forefathers ate the manna in the wilderness, and yet they died. This is the bread that comes down from heaven, so that anyone may eat of it and not die. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. And for a fact, the bread that I will give is my flesh in behalf of the life of the world. Have a great morning.
So a few years back, like a decade or so ago, I took 25 people to Guatemala for some community service and community building down there around some soccer missionaries. And it's a little bit of a daunting thing. I was a little intimidated taking 25 people to a foreign country in my young 30s. I was just a little bit intimidated. So I had a system to keep everything in check. We had 25 people and I was going to do a head count and reach 25 every time. So we get on the bus and head to the airport, 25 people. We get off the bus and we get up to the check-in and check our bags, 25 people. Check, we're doing good. We go through security, 25 people. Get on the airplane, 25 people. Fly to Houston, get off the airplane, 25 people. All right, we're doing well. Then we get our connection flight, 25 people on board. We're doing great. Fly into Guatemala. Go through customs, 25 people. We're doing good. And we pick up our bags, 25 people. We meet the missionaries. I'm like, yes, we made it. We all get in these vans and we head to go have dinner. Get to the place that we're going to have dinner, 23 people. And all of a sudden, the cell phone went off of the missionary who we were staying with. And they said, well, you left 2 people at the airport. We forgot 2 people at the airport. I let down my guard as soon as we got there and I thought, now we're good. I saw the missionaries, we're all good. And I left 2 people at the airport. Now, needless to say, I felt bad. They felt bad. We all felt bad that we left them at the airport. All was well. They kind of spoke a little bit of Spanish and was able to communicate what they were going through to some people in authority that could help them get where they need to go. And we sent a van back. They picked them up and brought them to our place to have dinner with us. And, you know, obviously we all kind of felt a little bit bad. Like, nobody likes to be forgotten. Nobody likes to be left behind. Nobody likes that. And in this passage today in John 6, there is this tie-in with an Old Testament story that we're supposed to kind of notice. And it's an Old Testament story about a guy named Enoch who was so holy and righteous that he skipped death. They just never die, and he got caught up into heaven and went to heaven without ever dying. Really interesting story out of the early books of the Bible in Genesis. And this is a story that we're kind of connecting with John 6 today. We're going to look at how Jesus' holiness is better than that of Enoch's and doesn't leave anybody behind, but comes back for us all. So we're going to jump into this passage, do a little bit of exploration, and see what we see on the other side. So let's hop in. So what is this bread from heaven that once you eat it, then you're never thirsty again, never hungry again? And how does bread quench thirst and hunger at the same time? These are questions I had rolling around in my head as I was reading this week. And to understand a little bit of the context of this, we got to understand a little bit of how they viewed the world. Now I'm standing here kind of in front of a cornfield with this bright blue sky behind me. And this is a perfect illustration for the division between heaven and earth. And they pretty much divided up reality into two realms. There was the realm of the heavens and the realm of the earth. And they believed that the heavens up there, rain came down from the heavens and crops grew up so they can eat and survive. So they believed that the realm of the heavens was where blessing came from, provision came from. So obviously that's where God lives. That's where angelic beings live. And there's a couple of human beings that lived in this heavenly realm that never died. And that would be Enoch, who we mentioned a little bit earlier, and Elijah, who was just taken up into heaven. These are two people whose righteousness, whose holiness was, I guess, so thick, was so quality drenched that they just passed over death. They skipped it and just went straight up into the heavens. So they believe that's why they had temples up on mountaintops, because you're closer to the heavens. Holy places were up on mountaintops. In the Bible, you're always going up on a mountaintop to meet with God. Why? Because the heavens are up there. You're closer. And then the realm of the earth was where humans lived, like lesser spiritual beings, evil forces. And then the realm of the dead. You were buried in the earth down below us. You were buried down there. So obviously they thought the realm of the dead is below our feet somewhere. And the oceans were there. It's the place of the dead. So they had this kind of a dichotomy of understanding the heavens and the earth. And Jesus here is saying something really unique. He says, I am bread from heaven come down to earth. Now this reversal of something from heaven coming down is not what they expect out of someone claiming righteousness. Someone claiming righteousness is someone who's brought up into heaven. Somebody who skips death, who skips over the human experience of death and dying, like Enoch and Elijah in their history, and goes into the realm of the heavens. And here, Jesus is claiming this reversal of Enoch, that he is this perfect, righteous person come down out of the heavens to be with us on the earth. And this is a little bit much for their brains to wrap around. Because it's not just coming down to us, but it's coming down for us, because Jesus is about to have a conversation where he's saying, I've come and I don't want anybody left behind. I don't want anybody forgotten. Because if you remember the Enoch story, Enoch was taken up. His righteousness was so great, he was taken up into heaven. And he's kind of like, see you later, earth. See you later, humans. I'm leaving y'all behind. And Jesus's righteousness surpasses that of Enoch. Because one, he's God in human form, but it's so much more that he's able to come down to us for us and say, I'm not leaving anybody behind. That's kind of the starting piece of the conversation where he takes verses 41 through 51. So let's jump in there and see what he says. So they start to murmur because Jesus is claiming that his Father is in heaven. And normally I don't like to use gender specifics of God. I like to just use the word God because I'm just sensitive to that. God isn't a man. Jesus was a man, but the person of God is spirit, and we are both male and female made in God's image. So I don't like to use he and him of God often. But here we can use this term Father because it's supposed to be contrasted to Joseph being the father of Jesus. Because here, if you remember in chapter 1 of John, it says the Word was with God, the Word was God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And that word dwelt is to tabernacle or to have a tent. Again, our minds are pulled back into the history of the Hebrew people here, wandering in the desert with a tent that God's presence was inhabiting. So here we're supposed to remember that. And when he claims God as Father, when Jesus claims God as Father, the crowd immediately says, wait a second, you didn't come down out of heaven. We know your parents. We know you're the son of Joseph. So this son of Joseph versus son of God is supposed to be something that we're supposed to kind of pay attention to and say, wait a second, they're not believing. But in chapter 1 of John's Gospel, this is the only other time that Joseph, Jesus's kind of earthly father, is mentioned. And that is when Philip believes and declares to the other disciple there, says, hey, we found the one that the whole Old Testament was pointing to. We found the one that's the Messiah King. It's the son of Joseph. So one claim to have the son of Joseph leads to belief, and one claim of being the son of Joseph is from unbelief. It's like, wait a second, we know this guy. Jesus claiming this holiness of being the bread from heaven that came down out of heaven, to claim a holiness that surpasses Enoch, to come down out of heaven for us. Everyone is immediately saying, but wait a second, that can't be, because I know your dad and I know your mom, and you grew up over, just 25 miles from here in Nazareth, just around the corner. We know your people. Your family lives in Capernaum here. We know you. How can this be true? So you're not some, city preacher that has come to put on a good show. It's like we know who you are and your history, and we've had, interactions with you and your family growing up, and now here you are making these weird claims, and it doesn't make sense in our brains at all. So Jesus's holiness is too human for comfort. Jesus's holiness looks a lot more, not like an angel, not even like Enoch. Jesus's holiness looks a lot more blue collar, like a carpenter walking around among us as one of us. The next thing is really confusing. I really had to wrestle with this concept for a little while till I understood, I guess, a little bit what Jesus was talking about, where he says, nobody can come to me unless my Father draws them to me. This is a really interesting phrase, because now if you're Calvinist and you just believe that God has preordained everyone to come and everyone else is, too bad, there's your easy answer. There it is. But there's a whole bunch of phrases in the rest of this gospel that actually contradicts that understanding. But we got to get underneath that topical understanding of this phrase to say what exactly is Jesus saying here. The word draw there is a Hebrew word that's used whenever it's used of somebody being arrested and drugged somewhere. It's either that or fishing term, where you toss a net into the water and then you draw the net back into the boat with fish within it. So there's two things, but it involves this almost dragging against somebody's will. How in the world is God going to drag somebody against their will to come and have understanding or faith or be a part of God's community of people? This doesn't seem to line up with the Jesus that I know, and this phrase was interesting. So what I noticed was that in John chapter 12, later on, this word draw is used again. So I'm thinking to myself, aha, we're supposed to connect chapter 6 with chapter 12 later because the same word is used. And Jesus says, when I am hoisted up, suspended between heaven and earth, he's talking about his crucifixion. When he's suspended between heaven and earth, I will draw all people to me. And then all of a sudden, we have this very inclusionary phrase. So this understanding, the next passage of next week, everybody is going to be abandoning Jesus because it's too hard for them to understand this very human concept of holiness. They want something more angelic, more like Enoch and not like the carpenter that they see before them. And because they want that, if they want to follow Jesus now, before the crucifixion happens, it's almost like they have to be drug along, like these disciples are being drug along, going from town to town and city to city. But at this present moment, it's too hard for people to understand what God is up to because they can't even fathom the self-sacrificial love of God in the capacity that Jesus is going to display for them when he's hanging between heaven and earth on the cross. So it sounds exclusionary at first. Nobody can come to God unless God says so. And then it's like, oh man, well, I hope I'm in that mix. But then in chapter 12, we see that resolution. That's just for the time being until this crucifixion event where the love of God is on full display and all people are going to be drawn to God. The next thing that Jesus says is probably the most difficult thing for people to handle in his day and age. And the passage directly following the one we studied today talks about how tons of people just abandoned Jesus over what he just said. What was so controversial that everyone abandons him? Not everybody, but a lot of people abandon him because of what he just said. First, he says that those who believe in me already have eternal life. This was something that was like really radical and revolutionary because eternal life was not where you went to when you died. You went to the place of the dead when you died. You were buried in the earth, like we talked about earlier. And then you went to this shadowy, dark place they called Sheol. There wasn't a whole lot of description about what it was like, but every single human being went there when they died, was their understanding. It was called the place of the dead. It's mentioned in the Psalms quite a bit. So everyone went to that place when they died and waited for this event at the end of all of human history when it came to a close called the resurrection, where God would resurrect everyone from the dead and then judge people who were righteous and wicked and send them to respectable places. Those who went on into a resurrected existence in the presence of God, that was called life eternal. And those who didn't, it was life, eternal judgment. That's in the book of Daniel. It's the only time in the Old Testament the word eternal life is actually used, is in the book of Daniel. Well, John takes that concept out of the book of Daniel, brings it forward into Jesus's teaching ministry. He's saying what he's offering is this post-resurrected reality in existence. Everything you think about, when you think about heaven and perfection and beauty and goodness and truth, what Jesus is doing in his life and work and teaching, he's grabbing a hold of all that stuff from beyond human history and dragging it into the present tense and saying, I'm making it available today and now and here. And he says, I'm doing that through offering my, what he says, sarx. This is a really crude phrase. This is what really turned people away. The word sarx is the word for body. But there's two words for body in the Greek language. There's soma and there's sarx. Soma is kind of, how I look, how I appear to you. Sarx would be like if I went out and played basketball a lot and I got all hot and sweaty and then I came and sat at your dining room table and had lunch with you and you're like, man, this guy stinks. That's my sarx right there. It's like the flesh part of us. It's the part that makes us human. It's the organs. It's the functions of the body. And Jesus says, those who partake of my body, not soma, not just how I look on the outside, but my humanity and warts and all kind of humanity. These are the ones who can experience what he calls eternal life. And what Jesus is doing is he's bringing this holiness back out of heaven, back away from the concept of Enoch, and putting it right in front of our plates and saying holiness is in the here and now of your sarx existence, of your human existence, where you plant your feet in this present moment. In the here and now and today, your holiness is caught up in this moment, right here and today, in who you actually are and the life you actually have. Not some pretty, Instagram picture of what you wish your life was like or what you think your life ought to be. But your holiness is caught up in the sarx of your existence. Warts and all, sweatiness and all, body and all, mind and all, emotions and all of it. The hot mess of you and the put together part of you. Everything, your holiness is all caught up in that one moment. And people said, that's too much. That's just too much. We know who you are. You're not some, city preacher. you know, come to the city to entertain us, and we know who you are, we know your history, and now you're claiming things that are just far outside of our concept of what it means to be a holy person, and they reject Jesus. Dang, that was tough. So we all want to be more of who we're meant to be. We all want to be some like idealized self of who we think we ought to be. We all want to be better human beings in this world, I would hope. You know, we all want to be more of us. And sometimes what happens is we have this Enoch understanding of who we think we should be, so holy that we're separate from everybody else in how we think and function and act in the world, so that we even barely touch the ground when we walk. We become so spiritual. We want to be like Yoda. We want to be like these, you know, monks high up on mountains that have wisdom and gifts and glory and all this stuff. And what Jesus is doing is he's taking all of that concept of holiness and he's just setting it right in your lap of today, in this present moment of who you actually are. And he's offering his holiness to us through his whole work and ministry. And I love what Richard Foster says about this. He says the discovery of God lies in the daily and the ordinary, not in the spectacular and the heroic. If we cannot find God in the routines of home and shop, then we will not find God at all. So what if holiness, our becoming, who God is making us to be and who we're intended to be, what if it involves more of our attentiveness than it does, you know, our actions and behavior in this world? Because actions and behavior can easily fool people, can easily just be adopted as masks to look like we're doing the right thing, but it doesn't come from the authentic places of who we are and who we're becoming. So what if that holiness involved more of our attentiveness in finding God in the here and now, in the middle of a cornfield on a blue sky, with our feet planted on the ground directly beneath us? What if it involved being in this present moment as we are, as it's presenting itself to us, with all the circumstances that we have to face today, the good and the bad and the ugly, the sarks of life is here. What if our holiness is caught up in this moment of today and now, and not some later event of who we wish we were or who we think we ought to be? What if the embodiment of our personhood and who we are in these circumstances of life that we're actually in, but in love, the best love that we can conjure up in each moment, is what it means to be holy? What if God is not way out there ahead of us and we need to sprint and go find God and become something else different in order to experience God? But what if God moves at 3 miles an hour right alongside of us as we walk this road, this path, this here and now, and not 75 miles an hour as God is speeding off ahead of us somewhere else and we're just desperately trying to keep up? What if God is in the here and now of this actual moment, and everything can turn into a miracle, and everything can be God's presence and provision to us if we just paid attention to what was going on and what was around us? There's this awesome benediction. It's rather short. We're going to have Laura read that for us, and it's a blessing of the ordinary.
And you thought you knew what a sign was. The parking space beside the store when you were late. The man who showed up just in time to hold the door when you were juggling 5 big packages. The spider plant that grew though you forgot to water it. The new nest in the tree outside your window. Chime of distant church bells when you're lonely. Rhyme of friendship. Apples. Sky, a trove of blue. And who's to say these miracles are less significant than burning bushes, loaves and fishes, or steps on water? We are blessed by marvels wearing ordinary clothes. How easily we're flooded by simple dress. Oranges, water, leaves, bread, crows. By Rosemary Watola Traumer.
Thank you for joining us for our online service today, and we hope that you enjoy the service, and if you wanna participate, then we'll welcome your readings and prayers and blessing
Recorded with your phone. If
you want to give financially, there's a link on the bottom of your screen. Subscribe to our YouTube or like our Facebook page. Hope, help, and healing.
That's right. We hope that you found some hope.
We hope you found some hope, help, and healing. See you next week. Bye. And may the force be with you, always.